So we'll go through and do an example of this. I guess right now it's telling me. Let's take a look. So what I want to do is we're going to start with, let's start with an interface an API that we have here for test data. Okay, so I have this interface, this API that we've written that gets back computer information, and it's given us back, it's random data, so the data is changing a lot. We can get back, give it a server name, we get back its IP address, obviously the name, CPU percentage, memory utilization, and temperature, and a timestamp. Okay, so if I passed in here, so again, this is what I want to ask the customer. Give me a URL for server 7, and it's going to look like that. And I should be able to go into a browser, and I'm formatting here the JSON in Chrome here, it's just a little plugin to format it. I should be able to get back a JSON block. If we can get to this point for not only the current value, historical value, and trend, then we're golden. We're going to be able to use this API for our interface. So here, if I change this now, you can see where the parameters are going to come from on here. If I change this to server 2, I'm getting back a different set of data for server 2. And in all honesty, on this particular API, doesn't matter what you write in here, we're going to give you data back. But obviously in the real world, you might not have a server 29. We do, because whatever we type in, we're just going to return back in this sample interface. So we have, that would be our current value. And I've cheated here, and I've got this stuff set up to get a trend. Let's just open up let's do it right here. To get a trend here, I'm going to say, here's my machine name, test 2, here's my start date, and here's my end date. And if I return that, I get a bunch of history for all these values, CPU, memory, and temperature with timestamps, and it looks like they're, I don't know, every hour or so piece of data across this time frame. So now I get a big JSON block, and I can use this for my trend data. And the final thing we'd ask the customer is, or you guys would figure out is, what about given a date, like 1/1/2016, can I get that data there? And it turns out, yes, we can. So here I've gotten for that given date, what was the value then? So now I have 3 URLs, which is great. Now I can start parameterizing these and use our JSON interface to kind of pull that data out. So if we have no questions, I'm going to start doing that now. So I'm going to do the same thing we did here in the Server Manager, install a new interface. In this case, I'm going to use JSON interface. I'm going to accept the terms and agreement. I'm going to call this training, and let's call it computers. This is about computers, this interface. Just ask me where I want to put it. Default's fine. It's going to give me, this is kind of setting up again some test data. We're just going to, don't worry about it, just say next, next. It's going to create the interface for us, and it's going to put in some stuff, which we're going to ignore, and we're going to write our own. So I'm going to go ahead and just delete all this for now, not to confuse anybody. We're going to start completely blank without any sample data, and write this from scratch. Clear out all the demo stuff here. That is not our base address. Okay, so again, remember what I talked about? It's a similar thing here. We have credentials. If you had some sort of security on this web service, in this case, we don't. It's anonymous. You can set your credential here, integrated basic digest, and put in a set of user credentials. If it has, a lot of these will have things like a token you pass in. Like some sort of API key that the user would have, and that would probably go in your base address. So it'll either be kind of a standard sort of authentication process or some sort of token authentication process. Neither one works fine, as long as we can get to it through a browser. So what we need now is, I got some notes here. Let's take a look at our base address. Remember when we were doing this, we had machine equals whatever, test 2. So that's going to be our parameter here. So I'm going to take this as my base address. I'm going to put it right here. Okay, so now, again, we'll replace this squiggly brace, 0 squiggly brace, with whatever parameter the user puts in. And I need to write my current value. So if I did nothing else and I hit test, and I put in server 2, okay. Basically, I'm going to make this big so we can see it here. I'm going to get back a bunch of data. So here is the raw data from the result, and I haven't actually told it to select anything, so the selected object data is the whole blob. And the whole blob is now here in value, which is wrong because obviously we need to tell it what we want. It's also given us a default timestamp because we haven't told it where to get a timestamp, so the system says there's no timestamp, so we'll give you a current time. Okay, so now what I want to do is, let me make this a little smaller again so I can read my notes. Okay, base path value. Just make sure I don't make mistakes here when I'm talking. Okay, so if we look at the result data here, we have the JSON is coming back. We have a data object. So this was our request going in, and the results coming back. We want to look at this data object. And this is standard.NET, so standard JSON. If I do a test again, okay, so now here's the raw results, and now we pared down our selected object to this data set of properties here. And just like JSON is all dot notation. So what I want is I want data as my base, and I want dot. Well, let's do dot CPU. And this one here actually has a timestamp field, so let's do dot timestamp. And now if I test this, server 2, I actually now have gone through and said, for data, give me dot CPU and dot timestamp. And this is now what I have down here in my result set. Now, this one is an interesting interface because I got not only CPU, but memory and temperature. The customer is likely going to want that. So we already have one parameter here for machine name. Let's make this another parameter for what value we want back. So now if I test, not only am I giving it the server name, I'm also going to give it what we want back. In this case, CPU. If I test again and say, you know what, I also want memory, I'll get back two different values from the same interface through the same web service. So now we have two parameters on that. So again, what we did is the request URI is empty because, and if it wasn't, we would append it to the base address. But in this, we'll do one here in a minute with that. So I'm getting back. So here's the URL that I passed in. Again, you should be able to open that in the browser and get data back. And then the raw JSON return kind of looked like this. It was an object with message data and some other timestamp maybe of the message. And we care about what's in the data. So we said go to the data node and give me .1, which is a passed-in parameter, and .timestamp. So that works for current value. And again, it kind of formats it here, but if you go in, you can see how it breaks everything up. We want to now look at our trend data, okay? So if you remember back here, let's go back to our URL. Here we have the machine name, and we have a start and end date, okay? So this part we already have in as our base address. So what I want to do is I want to take the rest of it here. If I go in, if I go in here, let me pull that back up. I don't need to keep switching context on it. If I go in here to trend data, okay, here's my base address, and I want to append this. And again, with our keywords, here we're going to have start date. And here we're going to have end date. Okay. And if I test this, I want London humidity. I want server 1 CPU. This right now won't work because we haven't given it enough information. And it's actually telling me, hey, we don't got enough information here. But what it does give me is it gives me my raw result set, which looks just like, surprisingly enough, what we see in this window behind us. So now what I need to do is figure out from the result path, it looks like here I want the history, which is coming back. So if you look here, the first node is history. So if I say, you know what, give me history. And what that's going to do is you'll notice here history, this is a JSON geeky thing, but history is an array. So I'm going to give it the start of the array of my data, and then I just want to tell it for this array, what fields do I want? And in this case, I parameterized it. So let's start with just .cpu. Won't parameterize it. And I want .timestamp. And if I test this, I'm going to ignore ignore this first parameter because in this case I have 1. I get back a trend or a series of values and timestamps for CPU. And again, just like I did before, I can make this my second parameter, and I can say server 2, and let's call it temperature. And that's not going to give me back anything because I spelled temperature wrong. I think this is a temperature. Did I spell it wrong? Temper. Oh, I got typo in the interface. So I'm able now. I have a parameterized trend. And finally, we'll do historical value. Again, if we go back to the query, the original query, this looks a lot like current value, except it has a date passed in. So I'm going to take this part and go to my historical value and set the request URI. And again here, let's parameterize this. Instead of being hard-coded, we want timestamp. And if I test this, you can see that, obviously I'm not returning, haven't told it what data, but you can see how it takes the base address and the second part of the request URI and forms one URL. Here's the base address up to here, and to the right is the request URI, so it combines them together, does the replacement of the 0 with SPU, I think we put in as a machine name, and the replacement with timestamp. So if I did the SPU CPU, let's give it a better name, server 3, server 2, again, we got machine equals server 3 and date. So I've got the data back. I just need to parse through the data, and this is very similar to current value. I want to start with the data node, and I want to get back dot, and I'm going to parameterize it, .1, and dot timestamp. Now if I say test, I got CPU in there. There's my CPU. I won't remember. Let's do memory. And there's my memory. Well, let's round trip that. Let's go to our designer here and let's say CPU, and let's do a memory. Oops. Make some KPIs out of this. Let's do a temp. And let's make this server 1 CPU. Server 2 or server 1 memory, server 1 temp. All right, and what I want to do now is I want to say for actual, I want server 1 CPU, and my interface name, I believe we called it training computers. Let's just cut and paste this, cut and paste this, and here I want server 1 memory. Incorrectly spelled temperature. So let's preview this, make sure we're getting data back, and we are. And I can also go ahead and just very quickly, let's make a second set. Let's do server 2. One interface, I've just parameterized it. Server name and for what piece of data I want to come back from the interface, memory, temperature, CPU. And let's put these on the home page and hit save. Well, let's go to our website again. And here I have trends and current values for CPU, memory, and temp across 2 servers with 1 interface.